Thanks all for coming. I'm Pete Peterson, the very grateful Dean of the Pepperdine's Graduate School of Public Policy, and it's a delight to welcome you here to today's Lunch and Learn, the first of these that we've done, but in association with a class taught at the School of Public Policy by our Professor Joel Fox. Thank you, Joel. So you all know, and certainly for our viewers who will be watching this on videotape, this particular event is part of the syllabus for Professor Fox's class that he's teaching on California politics and specifically the initiative and referendum process. So aside from the normal pressure that will befall the students who are due to speak here in public, they will also be graded for this. So please know that your response to their presentations may factor into Professor Fox's grading of these graduate students and future leaders. It's appropriate that we would be exploring these topics, especially the California ballot and particularly our initiative and referendum process, which once again makes for a very busy ballot for all of us as voters here in California. One of the phrases that we often use at the policy school is that we're about putting the public back into public policy. And at its best, the initiative and referendum process is about engaging the public in direct policymaking. Yeah. Now, that's not to say that it's always a good thing. And for some of the presentations that you'll be hearing today, which are presented in very much of a balanced perspective on crucial initiatives, one might wonder, why are these things even being introduced? Why are these policy issues even being introduced to broader, what one might call public engagement? But that is our system here in California. And one that, again, we either participate in or have others participate for us. And in that responsibility is ours. I was looking for a quotation from James Bryce, who was a British diplomat who came to the United States in the 1880s. He wrote a 2-volume book called The American Commonwealth, which, if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it as a way of understanding America from an outside perspective in the late 19th century. In some ways, it was kind of a 50-year bookmark from Tocqueville's Democracy in America, a much better known book of a similar nature. And while I couldn't find the exact quote, there was something in there that Bryce remarks that he just can't believe, as somebody from Great Britain, also a democracy, but he remarks several times in looking at the American political system how many responsibilities were placed upon American voters for decision, right? It was everything from the dog catcher to the president, Bryce remarked, was left for public decision by the vote. And certainly at the time, in the beginning, very early stages of the progressive movement, when Americans were becoming more aware of some of the corruptions that were happening, mostly at the municipal level, but even in the states, there was the quest for greater public involvement in our political system that was seen in many places, whether it's Tammany Hall or the St. Louis machine, or here in California in the late 1800s, where we had a state legislature that was essentially run by the railroads, that the importance of bringing in outside influence, the importance of bringing the public into public policy was essentially the genesis or the engine that spurred on the creation of our initiative and referendum process. So again, we can critique it and we can support it or adore it, But at the same time, what is very much true is we need to participate in it. Because one of the things I think we're seeing, and certainly I think the most enduring critique of our initiative and referendum system, is that it has become increasingly dominated by special interests. And so the full circle irony of the initiative and referendum process, that it was started as a response to special interest domination in California politics, has now reasserted itself in the process itself. And that will only be encountered and fought when California voters like you all, citizens of not only this great nation, but also of this great state, are involved in both learning about these issues, but then directly participating through our votes that have been fought for and died for. So again, thank you very much for joining us for this important discussion. As you see in the agendas on your table, we're going to begin. I'm going to turn the moderator's microphone here in a second over to one of our other faculty, Professor Dan Schnur, who will kick off an exploration of the individual ballot measures. We will then take a short break for lunch, bring those back to the table. And as we often do at the policy school, this will be a working lunch for you all, certainly for Dan and myself, as we will hop up here to the table here, the riser, to both talk about the broader races, both here in the Los Angeles area, where we have a very important mayoral race, but also statewide, and also nationally. We'll talk for a bit, but this is also really meant to be more of a Q&A session for you all to engage with your questions. So again, thanks for being highly engaged citizens in what portends to be a historic election season. And so without any further ado, I'll turn it over to my friend, fellow Packer fan, and professor at the policy school, Dan Schnur.
Well, I was a bit worried because Pete and I have known each other for many years, and I was alarmed that might be the first time that he ever spoke in public about me and did not mention the Green Bay Packers, saving it at the last minute. So I moved to California for 6 months, 32 years ago. And that means I've had the fascinating experience of watching 16 general election cycles. And in every single one of them, in the last few days before an election, and I'm guessing that many of you experience this also, a lot of friends and family members and neighbors will come to me and saying, oh my gosh, I've been paying attention to the campaign for governor, to the campaigns for president, the campaigns for Congress. What's going on with all these ballot initiatives? What should I do? And I get to say, let me tell you what to do. And so, Pete, Joel, I think if we had done this slightly differently, it might have made even more sense to do it on Saturday, November 5th. Because I suspect we would have had not just a few dozen people, but a few hundred people all desperately clamoring to find out how to make sense of this incredibly confusing ballot. But for those of you who are here today, who are focusing in on these important questions much earlier than most of our fellow Californians, why don't we consider ourselves as the first concentric circle of political brilliance in California? Because we are paying attention several weeks out rather than several hours before the polls open. I've had the great privilege for the last several years of teaching a class every spring semester at the Graduate School for Public Policy. And I've had a tremendous experience getting to know some really amazing students. And I'm going to give a few shout outs to Clare, amazing students like Clare McKenzie, like Lani Romero, and even to amazing alums like Shelby Dewberry, who after finishing her degree at Pepperdine is now working in this election cycle to turn voters out to the polls just the way Pete and Joel and our colleagues and I hope our graduates will. So before we go any further, let's give a round of applause not just to Clare and Lani and to Shelby, but all of the Pepperdine students and alums who are here with us today. So I have a quote to share too, just like Pete's. And my quote is the following. And Shelby, Lani, Clare, you cannot answer this, but anybody else, I'm going to ask for an audience vote on this. See if you can tell me who said what I consider to be a phenomenally important quote about California national politics. Who said the following? Who said politics is too important to be left to the politicians? Politics is too important to be left to the politicians. Was it Howard Jarvis? Was it Cesar Chavez? Was it William Jennings Bryan? Who in the room here today thinks that it was Howard Jarvis, the father of Proposition 13, who said politics is too important to be left to the politicians?
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4.5, 5.5, 6 3/4, 7.5 votes. Okay. How many people think that Cesar Chavez said that? No votes. Wow. How many people think that William Jennings Bryan, the great populist of the late 19th century, said it? 2 people. All right. What Clare and Lani and Shelby could tell you, if I'd given them the opportunity to, is that one of the things that I've learned in my many years of teaching is that if you attribute a quote to a really famous person, students write it down because they think they're going to get asked about it on a midterm or a final. Every semester, at the beginning of the semester, I share a really august quote with my students and then explain to them that nobody said it. I made it up. And so I apologize for those of you who will not be taking my class in the spring, but that's a bad habit that I get into. So neither Jarvis nor Chavez or Bryan said it. Sure did.
Sure.
And for those of you who do take my class in the spring, that will be on the midterm. One of the most notable things about this ballot, and it's worked very well for our purposes, I think you'd agree, Joel, is we have a much smaller ballot when it comes to initiatives than when we have in years past. I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One is, a few years back, the legislature passed a bill that gave them the opportunity, once an initiative had qualified for the ballot, it gave the legislature a second chance to go back and negotiate amongst themselves and with the authors of the initiative to try to resolve it. So therefore, not all of these decisions would be left to the voters. And what we've seen every election cycle since then is on some of the most contentious matters that legislators, frankly, were just instinctively looking to avoid taking a difficult position on. Once they saw the initiative coming to the ballot, getting another chance to go back in and work on it has allowed us to avoid some of the more contentious fights we would have had in the past. The other challenge, of course, as with every other aspect of society, has been the pandemic. And the act of signature gathering, as you might guess, has become much, much more challenging in an era of COVID. And so signature gatherers for initiatives across the ideological spectrum have simply had a much more difficult time approaching voters than they might have before 2020. So for those reasons and perhaps others, we have a more manageable ballot this year. But I will close by offering you a question to consider, and perhaps this is something we can talk about over at lunch today. To me, the initiative process here in California and elsewhere represents a fundamental conundrum, if you will. 2 very important questions working at cross purposes with each other. On one hand, most Californians, myself included, love the initiative process. We love the idea of a direct democracy that allows us to weigh in on issues that are important to us, rather than relying on politicians of either party to make those decisions for us. On the other hand, most Californians, myself included, when we get a ballot, particularly one that's much larger than this year's, we say, why is this being left to us? We elect supposedly really smart men and women to go to Sacramento every 2 years to make these decisions for us. Why are they dodging these decisions and putting them back in our lap? So on one hand, we have this understandable and justifiable thirst for direct democracy. On the other hand, we want our elected representatives to do their job. And so one thing I hope we can talk about a little bit later over lunch, in addition to the initiative themselves and many other political questions on the ballot next month, so I'd love to hear some of all of your thoughts, both the students and our guests, as to what you think about the process itself. Is it a necessary platform that allows voters to speak directly about decisions that directly impact our lives? Or is it an easy way out for our politicians who don't want to have to make difficult decisions? Or is it a combination of both? So we're now going to get to what I think you would all agree is the most important part of the program. And that's where Joel and his extremely impressive students lead us through an overview of the initiatives on which we'll be voting this November. And then, as Pete said earlier, after that, take a short break, grab some lunch, and come back for a broader conversation. But thanks so much to all of you for being here today. Thanks to the students for all the hard work you've put in, not just on this assignment, but I know Joel is pretty much of a harsh taskmaster in his class. So very impressed with the students who've been working hard all semester long. Thanks very much to all of our guests for taking the time on a not so beautiful Southern California morning to join us for this important conversation. And thanks very much for letting me join you here today as well. Let's get to work. We're going to start with Chloe Edwards, who's going to talk to us about Proposition 1. Chloe, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Dean Pearson, Professor Fox, and Professor Schnur for giving us the opportunity to speak to you all today. I'm the first student to go, so bear with me, I'm a little nervous. But I'm here to speak to you guys about Proposition 1. So as many of you are aware, on June 24th of this year, the United States Supreme Court made the decision that abortion is not a constitutionally protected right, and therefore placed the power of how to decide if abortion should be legal back in the state hands of the states. There's also other important cases that we should note that the Supreme Court had that did find the constitutionally protected right to buy and use contraceptives. So this includes, but is not limited to, condoms, birth control, and other means of birth control products. Federal law often requires health insurance plans to pay for these contraceptives. So currently in California, there are laws in place protecting the rights to privacy. Recent interpretations of this right have led California courts to include reproductive rights under this right to privacy. So this includes the right to have an abortion. There are specific restrictions under these state laws that include abortion has to be carried out by a licensed professional. Also, a fetus cannot be viable when an abortion takes place. The term viable here implies the likely ability to survive outside of the womb. Give or take, this is generally around 24 weeks. Additionally, health insurance plans under California's state health insurance market, Covered California, covers abortions and contraceptives for the nearly 2 million Californians who buy this form of health insurance. The state and federal government often help Californians purchase such plans under Covered California, and I'd like to note that the state alone bears the weight of paying for abortion services under this plan. So what is Proposition 1? Prop 1 changes the California Constitution to say the state cannot deny or interfere with a person's reproductive freedom, and that people have the fundamental right to choose, 1, whether or not to have an abortion, and 2, whether or not to use contraceptives. In summary, a vote yes for Prop 1 would mean a change to the California Constitution to directly express the protection of reproductive rights, including the right to an abortion and the use of contraceptives. A vote no would mean there'd be no change to the California Constitution, keeping the current state laws regarding the right to abortion and contraceptive use. Supporters of this proposition argue the need to protect reproductive rights, regardless of the decision at a federal level, must happen. Laws at a state level can be changed, and so there is the possibility that the right to an abortion could be changed if it is not included in the state constitution. Opponents of this proposition often argue this is a redundant thing to do. They also state that it could allow for late-term abortions, as Proposition 1 does not have a defined timeline on when an abortion can take place. There's the argument that it could be expensive and a waste of time. So currently, under this proposition, there would be no direct fiscal requirement. However, if this were to pass, there is the possibility that they could expand the belief on how reproductive rights takes place, so there could be fiscal ramifications in the long run. Proposition 1. Thank you all.
Great job, Claire. You had absolutely nothing to be nervous about whatsoever. It doesn't feel bad to have wasted all that stress unnecessarily. Our second speaker will be addressing Proposition 26. As I mentioned earlier, Lani Romero took my class last spring and did terrific work throughout the semester. He thought last April that he was done with me forever. No such luck, Lani. But we're very happy to have you here today, and we're very eager to hear your overview on Proposition 26.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Professor Schnurr, for the kind words. Really appreciate that. So I am going to struggle with this microphone, but okay. So it's good. I am doing Proposition 26, which allows for in-person roulette, dice games, sports wagering on tribal lands, and it's a constitutional amendment and statute put on the ballot by petition signatures. So it allows for bets on certain horse race tracks for people aged 21 and over, private lawsuits with penalties of up to $10,000 per violation to enforce these gambling laws, and it directs 10% of daily revenues to a new California Sports Wagering Fund after subtracting prize earnings, in which the fund firstly calculates the minimum amount to be spent on K-12 schools. Next, the revenue will be used for state regulatory costs, remaining revenues will then have 15% to be used for addiction and mental health services. 15% for sports betting and gambling enforcement costs, and 70% to the state general fund. Its fiscal impact includes an increase in state revenue with upper limits of tens of millions annually. A portion of these revenues may assist in increased state regulations. Enforcement costs would not likely exceed those of millions annually, which is less than 1% of the general fund's budget. So voting yes will mean that the state will host 4 racetracks for in-person sports betting. These tracks will direct a portion of the revenues to the state general fund. Tribal casinos will be allowed to offer in-person sports betting, roulette, and dice games such as craps, if also allowed by tribal governments in agreement with the state. So they have to agree with the state for that. Regulatory costs related to sports betting will be the responsibility of said tribes. Entities and individuals will also have new power to seek enforcement of state gambling laws. Voting no will mean that sports betting will remain illegal in the state of California. Tribal casinos will continue to be prohibited from offering roulette or dice-related games. Finally, the status quo remained in place in relation to the state's existing gambling laws. The Yes campaign emphasizes that only adults will be allowed to place sports bets. The campaign also argues that proposition enables tribal self-sufficiency by directing revenue for education, healthcare, and other social services. Yes also argues that the proposition promotes safe and responsible gambling and also helps prevent and stop illegal gambling. The No campaign emphasizes the expansion of gambling that they believe will enable underage gambling and can fuel addiction. The campaign has concerns over the fact that 5 wealthy gambling tribes are sponsoring this proposition, which expands their monopoly on the gambling market to include sports betting. Concerns also exist on the negative impact it can have on other communities of color. And that's it.
Now you can see why I enjoyed working with Lani so much in spring semester. So, as most of you know, there are not one but 2 ballot initiatives addressing the question of sports gaming this November. And as you've already gathered, I am a inveterate sports fan who has placed a grand total of 2 sports bets in my life. And just in case anyone's curious, I'm 1-1. But now we're going to hear about Proposition 27, and we're very fortunate that we're going to get an excellent overview on it from Duo Zhang. Duo, the floor is yours.
So California Proposition 27, the legalized sports betting and revenue for homeless prevention fund initiative is on the ballot in California as a combined initiated constitutional amendment and state statute on November 8th, 2022. You would vote yes if you support legalizing online and mobile sports betting for persons 21 years of age or older, establishing regulations for the mobile sports betting industry, impose a 10% tax on sports betting revenues and licensing fees, and allocating tax revenue to account for homeless programs and account for tribes not operating sports betting. You would vote no if you oppose this ballot initiative, thus continuing to prohibit sports betting online in California. Proponents of Prop 27 include 3 of the state's smaller tribes, national gambling companies like DraftKings and BetMGM, homelessness groups, local elected officials, and community leaders. Their coalition in support of Proposition 27 asserts the measure would create a competitive and safe online sports betting market in California and provide significant funding to help address homelessness in the state. They argue Proposition 27 is the only measure on the ballot that would guarantee a large and stable source of funding, an estimated $300 million annually, for homelessness, mental health, and addiction services. They also say that Proposition 27 would benefit the state's tribal population by allocating 15% of the tax revenue from sports betting to non-gaming tribes. Opponents of Prop 27 include some of the state's tribes, faith-based groups, political organizations, including the California Democratic Party, several elected officials, and other groups. Some of the arguments that are online and mobile wagering would put the state's youth at risk, exacerbate problem of gambling, and threaten tribal economics. Additionally, some opponents say that Proposition 27 would give a large out-of-state online gambling business too much control over California's sports betting market and would put those tribes to wish to offer online sports betting on their own at a competitive disadvantage against the well-organized national brands. So that's Proposition 27. Thank you.
Excellent job, Duo. Thank you so much. I know we've all seen quite a few commercials, both for and against Prop 26 and 27 over the last several weeks. So getting a much more even-handed overview of both is very, very helpful. Not all of the initiatives have gotten quite as much attention as the 2 gaming measures, but that doesn't mean that the others aren't just as important. And so with that, I'm going to ask Eric Green to join us and give us his overview on Proposition 28.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming here today. So Prop 28 is a ballot initiative on the California 2022 midterms. It's all about devoting arts and music education funding for school districts and schools across the state. Just to give some background on that, school districts and schools are allocated a certain amount of funds for arts and music education. It depends all on what the different diversity of students in the schools. So if certain schools have represent a higher portion of low income communities, then they're going to be given a little bit more funding than the school that's given that doesn't represent as many low income students. As regards to what programs are fit, state currently funds 2 after school programs for each school district that amounts to $5 million a year for the state of California. Half of those funds will be used for academic purposes, such as tutoring, for example, and then half of that will also be used for enrichment purposes. When it comes to this proposition, it will give school districts additional funding for arts and music education without raising taxes. There's also, in order for this, make sure that these funds are used appropriately, there will be strict accountability and transparency standards put in place. There will be annual audits on school districts to make sure that these funds are used appropriately. And then also, another argument is that arts and music education will help prepare the students of California for the creative economy that has been flourishing throughout the state's history. And this will help provide a well-trained workforce for that section of our economy. When it comes to the criticism of this initiative, there is an argument that this will hurt the freedom of choice the schools have when it comes to measuring their priorities. Principals already are having a hard time getting reports out on how they've been using funding in their schools due to the funding and the cuts of programs during the COVID-19 pandemic. So there is question as to how are schools going to be able to, how are principals going to be able to get out reports fast in regards to arts and music funding if this proposition were passed. Teachers in the arts and music industry are underrepresented in the state of California. And then the other argument is that there's enough funds from Prop 98 already to help with this problem of funding arts and music education. So obviously if this proposition were to be passed, there definitely will need to be a full explanation of how teachers are being paid. Is it from the basket of Prop 98 funds, or is it the basket now of this newly created Prop 28? Also, there should be an emphasis in regards to how school districts work collaboratively with their schools. Obviously, in all types of industries, right, we look for that organizational trust between our supervisors and the employees in our organizations. And then another piece of criticism is that 80% of the funding will go that schools given in regards to arts and music education funding has to be spent on hiring arts and music staff. So obviously, as you can tell from an economic standpoint, if a school is given $100 million for arts and music education, that means $80 million would have to be spent on arts and music staff. Problem with that is how with arts and music teachers being underrepresented in the state of California, then how are we going to be able to use those funds? How are we going to be able to use those funds appropriately? Also, this affects how schools are going to be able to do their LCAPs, or local control accountability plans, which are how schools and school administrations help devise those reports to help increase the influence of student outcomes to the goals for that school and the school year. So overall, just like every ballot initiative, there's going to be benefits and costs. The accountability and potential economic impact make this proposition intriguing, but also in regards to the shaky economic situation that we're getting right now in the state of California, the potential negative impact this could have on school district schools could present a few problems. So this will be very interesting, but thanks for your time.
Thank you, Eric. Excellent presentation, and also let the record show that Eric, to his credit, is the only one in the room today who wore a tie for this discussion. I was trying to decide whether or not to wear a jacket or not. And Joel was trying to decide whether to wear a dress shirt or a t-shirt. I know Pete was trying to decide whether to wear dress pants or shorts. But Eric, thank you for giving this the seriousness it deserves, not just in your presentation, but in your preparation also. So we're going to keep moving through the presentations. And I've already bragged to you about Lani Romero, but not to raise expectations to an unfairly high level. But you're about to meet another former student of mine, the amazing Clare McKenzie. And while it would love to Claire's preference, she would be talking about an initiative on environmental protection. But given the shortened ballot, that's not an option. So instead, she's going to be talking to us today about Proposition 29. Claire will be excited to hear your overview.
Hello everybody, my name is Clare McKenzie. I will be talking to you about Proposition 29. So for the third election cycle in a row, Californian voters are making decisions about kidney dialysis. Proposition 29 is sponsored by the Service Employees International Union, United Healthcare Workers West, which is the same organization that sponsored the similar initiatives, Proposition 23 in 2020 and Proposition 8 in 2018. Proposition 29 would amend the California State Health Code to require that a physician, nurse practitioner, or physician assistant is on site at chronic kidney dialysis clinics during treatment. Under Proposition 29, physicians must disclose ownership interests over 5%, and clinics must report infection data to the state of California. Finally, Proposition 29 would no longer allow clinics to refuse treatment based on source of payment, including Medi-Cal, Medicare, and Medicaid. This initiative is supported by the California Democratic Party, California Labor Federation, and of course the SEIU, United Healthcare Workers West. Supporters claim that the multi-billion-dollar kidney dialysis industry does not reinvest its profits back into patient care, which is a misuse of the taxpayer dollars that they are earning. Further, Proposition 29 will ensure that patients receive safe treatment under the care of highly trained clinicians and without discrimination of payment source. Opponents to Proposition 29 include the California Republican Party, state and national dialysis organizations, and major dialysis corporations, including DaVita and Fresenius. They claim that this initiative threatens the lives of Californian dialysis patients when clinics are forced to hire unnecessary staff, stifle their profits, and potentially shut down. This opposition also stresses that Proposition 29 will increase state and local government costs by tens of millions of dollars annually. And also that Californians have rejected the two extremely similar propositions that have already been on other ballots. So there are over 600 kidney dialysis clinics in California serving 80,000 patients a month, which makes this a highly impactful ballot measure. And on top of that, this measure could make another appearance on the ballot in 2024 if it does not pass this election cycle, which extra emphasizes the need for an informed electorate. Many Californians are increasingly confused by this fight for dialysis patient rights unfolding through the initiative process.
In my class last spring, Claire, of course, was an extraordinary overachiever, so that's why you got an overview, not just on the 2022 ballot, but perhaps on the 2024 ballot as well. Excellent job, Claire. Thank you very, very much. We're going to move on. We have only 2 initiatives left, but one of the most high profile, one of the most interesting initiatives on the ballot, I think you'd all agree, is Proposition 30. And we're very lucky to have Lacey Castecho here to give us an overview on Prop 30. Lacey, I hope I didn't mangle your surname too badly. The horrible things with Schnur, but we're very happy to have you here, so we're eager to hear your presentation.
well fumbling with this, but thank you, Professor Schnurr. I'm Lacey Kestischer, and I'll be giving an overview over Proposition 30. So Proposition 30 seeks to increase the income tax for Californians earning above $2 million by an additional 1.75%. The revenue from this tax increase would thereafter be used to fund zero-emission vehicle programs and wildfire prevention. If passed, this ballot measure would take effect on January 1st, 2023, and last until January 1st, 2043, or earlier if lower emission standards are met before then. This would result in the income tax of individuals earning above $2 million increasing from 13.3% to 15.05%. This additional tax, as of right now, would generate between 3 to 4.5 billion annually, but those measures could change based off of migration into the state and other changes. 80% of the revenue would be used to fund zero-emission vehicle programs, and of this 80%, 45% of the revenue would be put towards payments to help households, businesses, and governments purchase zero-emission vehicles. The remaining 35% of revenue would be used to fund charging stations for these electric vehicles. The other 20% of the revenue would be used for wildfire response and prevention, and this would primarily go towards hiring, training, and retaining Californian firefighters. So the supporters of Proposition 30 include the California Democratic Party, LIFT, CAL FIRE Local 2881, the American Lung Association, and California Environmental Voters. On the other hand, its opponents consist of Governor Newsom, the California Teachers Association, the Republican Party of California, the California Chamber of Commerce, and other taxpayer associations. Supporters claim that Proposition 30 will be funded by the wealthiest Californians to restore clean air and reduce carbon emissions throughout the state. Opponents argue that California already has the highest taxes in the country, and that the existing general fund can be used to support policies that reduce air pollution. So conclusively, a yes on Proposition 30 is a vote for increased taxes to fund environmental policies. A no opposes these policy changes. It's now up to Californians to decide whether Proposition 30 passes or fails. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lacey Kestischer, for that excellent presentation. Very rare that we see an initiative that divides either of the two major parties the way this one has. So hopefully we'll have a chance to talk about that a little bit further over lunch. Our final ballot initiative will be discussed by Eamon Viens. And Eamon, as you might have guessed by now, if you're tracking with us on the numbers, is going to be presenting an overview on Proposition 31. Eamon, we're eager to hear your thoughts.
Hi, I'm Eamon. I'm going to talk about Prop 31. So Senate Bill 793 passed in 2020 to ban flavored tobacco sales. Prop 31 is the referendum to overturn that law. A referendum allows voters to overturn a bill passed by the legislature. Those who are opposed to SB 793 becoming law gathered enough signatures to qualify this referendum for the ballot. If you want to keep the bill, which is a ban on flavored tobacco, you have to vote yes. If you don't want the ban, then vote no. Some arguments for keeping the ban are Prop 31 will protect kids from getting addicted to nicotine. The American Lung Association in California says using candy flavors to get kids into trying nicotine is part of their business model. In California, almost all high school e-cigarette users prefer flavored products. Today, over 2 million middle and high school students nationwide use e-cigarettes. Okay, another argument is Prop 31 saves lives and taxpayer money. Tobacco is the #1 preventable cause of death in California, where tobacco-related diseases kill 40,000 people each year. Of all the kids who become new smokers each year, almost a third will ultimately die from it. Tobacco companies put taxpayers, whether they smoke or not, on the hook for billions of dollars in tobacco-related healthcare costs. So some arguments for repealing the ban are Prop 31 will cost taxpayers. A legislative analysis found that Prop 31 will lead to significant revenue losses that will exceed $1 billion in the next 4 years. That means less money for healthcare, education, programs for seniors, and law enforcement. Another argument for repealing the ban is Prop 31 is adult prohibition. Prop 31 enacts a sweeping new ban on menthol cigarettes, flavored smokeless tobacco, and other flavored non-tobacco nicotine products for adults over the age of 21. They argue prohibition has never worked, it didn't work with alcohol or marijuana, and it won't work now. As a reminder, a yes vote upholds the law passed by the legislature, and a no vote removes the law banning flavored tobacco.
Thank you so much, Eamon. And what I will ask all of you, before we break for lunch, is you may have heard Dean Peterson mention earlier that the students were going to be graded by Professor Fox, not just on the quality of their presentations, which I think we would agree was outstanding, but also on the level of enthusiasm, the response they received. So not only because they deserve it, but in order to make sure they get A's, can you please join me in giving a very enthusiastic round of applause to all of the student prevention students. I'm very grateful to all of you for leading us through this very complicated ballot, and I think I'm speaking for most of the old people in the room. I tell you how impressed we are by the depth of your research and the impressiveness of your presentations. I started out earlier with a fake quote that politics is too important to be left to the politicians. Maybe what I should revise that for going forward is politics is too important to be left to us old people. And the fact that 7 really impressive young Pepperdine graduate students were able to lead us through these complicated issues is something for which we're not only very grateful, but there's a great lesson in it for all of us too. That ultimately we're going to be turning all of this over to all of you. And I feel much better that we'll be in good hands when that transition occurs. Let's give them one more round of applause. Now, Pete, you'll be personally delivering lunch to everyone, is that the way this works?
Yes, just come to me.
Okay. Where do we go from here?
I think we've got food set up in the back.
Okay.
And so just quickly for 5 minutes or so, pick up some food, come back.
Everyone grabs your lunches, come back, and then we will start our more interactive conversation.